Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ancient Warfare Podcast. And Happy New Year. It's the first, no, it's not. It's the first podcast of 2026. First full podcast. I was going to say it's the first Friday when we always record, but it isn't. It's the second Friday, for me at least. And so it is for Mark McCaffrey and Mark DeSantis, who have joined me today. But for Murray Dam, it's already the 10th. And apparently that's a date we want to remember. But it doesn't live in infamy, depending on your point of view, I suppose.
So yes, the 10th of January in 49 BC is when Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. So I thought, given that we're talking on this anniversary, even though this won't be published until a week later, we could talk about that anniversary, that this is the day, the mathematics wise 2000 and something years ago, that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon and kicked off the Roman civil war between him and Pompey, which, the rest is history, as they say. I'm wearing my Dungeons and Dragons shirt because it's the closest thing I have to a dice shirt. And of course, one of the most famous things about the crossing of the Rubicon is Julius Caesar's statement, "Let the die be cast." More on that anon. But we thought we would talk about the lead up to and the crossing of the Rubicon because in the Northern Hemisphere, you're thinking about it. In the Southern Hemisphere, it's about to happen, or it's just happening on the 9th, 10th of January, 49 BC. So let's go back to 49 BC. We are Julius Caesar and or Pompey, and what's happening in the lead up to the Civil War.
Exactly. The question is, how far back do we want to go? Because this really has kind of a long lead up, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, you can go. You keep coming back. You end up back at Marius and then at Gracchi, and you're like, wait. How is all of this? And it's one of those fascinating things about Roman history is that the repercussions of those things with the Gracchi and they're called the reforms of Marius. It's just the easiest term, even though now it's a process. It's not Marius's fault. There's a series of refinements happening in the Roman military system, which lead to what happens in the civil war between Sulla and Marius, and then ultimately into the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, mainly around who the loyalty of the army lies with, the individual general as opposed to the state, and the problems of paying your legionaries. Not that that's new. The first time that legionaries get paid, I think, is the 320s, according to Livy. So, it's all of those and together.
It's really about paying the veterans, right? I mean, it's the legionaries who
the retirement homes,
are now being recruited en masse, because they've always recruited poorer legionaries, but now we have a lot of legionaries who have nothing to go back to other than the money they have saved up or kept as booty from their campaigns, and now they have to be settled. And the generals feel it's their responsibility, and that is one of the main problems, I think.
I think it's also about the two words that keep jumping out are dignitas and auctoritas, and that is, it's always been, the Roman Republic has always been built on this idea of competition between the aristocrats, and the idea that the competition for vying for the different magistracies every year, the consulship, praetorship, and the potential windfalls that will come if they get prorogued into a proconsular command out in the provinces. This is a competition that is ongoing between all of these, high up families. But the difference is in the last century BC, when you get to the Mariuses, the Sullas, and eventually where we're talking to tonight, the Crassuses, the Pompeys, and Caesar, of course, that they are, if you like, hogging the limelight and taking these, what would be magistracies that are turning over on a more regular basis, especially proconsular commands. They should be 1-2 year commands, and here all of a sudden in the last century BC you've got people like Pompey and Caesar taking commands for 5-10 years, and of course that builds up a great amount of hostility against them amongst their fellow aristocratic community back in Rome. And that is a big cause of what ends up being the Civil War. Nobody wanted the Civil War. But in the end, it was this competition between the senatorial class that ultimately leads to it.
And I think that other thing about dignitas is when Caesar is requested that he lay down his command, it's an affront to his dignity. And I think that's the Caesar's main pretext, is that it's shameful for him to be doing that, and therefore he makes the ultimate decision to cross the Rubicon, which has entered modern Rubicons everywhere for various different political entities.
It's money and ego.
yeah, power. Yes.
Except it's amazing that we've got such a little river as well. The Rubicon is the name that everybody goes to. Everybody knows that, even people that, really don't know that much about the Romans or Roman history, Rubicon means something to everyone. And of course, you look back at it, about this Caesar crossing the Rubicon, and historians are still arguing today which river in northern Italy is actually the Rubicon, and most of the ones they're arguing over are little streams that are little more than drains today, and it's such a big name for such a non-entity.
Mind you, that happens a lot in Roman history. The Allia is a drainage ditch today. The big 390 BC defeats, it's a trickle. And I think the Rubicon, you can walk, step over it. It's not a riding.
The one that is most
splashing.
Popular as the identity for it. Certainly. I think the latest picture I saw of it really looks unappealing. So
this is what they'll write history about. But let's start with some counterfactual history, because we have a couple of questions for today. Raymond on our Patreon channel asked, if Caesar had decided to give himself up to the Senate for trial, what do you believe that outcome would have been? So, it's not just his ego. There is a potential for trial hanging over his head when he makes this decision.
This, of course, stems from his consular year back in 59, where, of course, he is supposed to be consul along with Bibulus, who has been promoted into the consular position by the aristocrats who want to counter Caesar's more popular stance and agenda. And especially when you've got Pompey, who I know I'm sort of going back and back, but Pompey, who has of course come back from his eastern campaigns, he's had a very irregular career throughout, having unusual command after unusual command. He has been favored with this most recent one by the aristocrats, but when he gets back, he finds a very tepid sort of reception for him, and he turns to Caesar to get his eastern settlements done and dusted, and also to get his veterans some land, etc. At the same time, Crassus is always out looking to promote young, up-and-coming, popular senators like Caesar. He's had some failures over time, like Catiline. But, of course, the three of them getting together in 59 allows Caesar to be a little bit more bolshy in terms of how he goes about his politics. And in the end, he effectively sidelines Bibulus and does a lot of irregular moves in his consular year. Out of that, there is the grounds for his trial once he becomes a private citizen again, hence why he's in Gaul for 10 years, prorogued, and making sure that if he does come back, he would like to come back and actually do what Crassus and Pompey had actually done back in 71 BC, and that was that they had stepped straight from having their imperium as commanders in the field to being elected and then stepping straight into their consular position, stepping over the boundary on their first day of office. Caesar's got this in mind, that this is how he's going to avoid any prosecution. But, of course, everybody gradually through the 50s is coming to the idea of, actually, we don't want this. But at the same time, Pompey's got a little problem, because if Caesar isn't allowed to do this, Pompey's still got some irregular commands himself in Spain. So does he give things up, or does Caesar give things up? And if so, is it both of them that are going to suffer, or just one?
Is it just then Caesar's ego, or is there an actual real threat of trials? That's what this question is about.
Well, if you look at some of the prosecutions that have gone on in the previous 15 years, the two that stand out are Gabinius, he goes off and has a command in the east and intervenes in Egypt. He gets a lot of profit out of that. He's already, staked his claim to being a Pompey supporter, helping Pompey to get his extreme command against the pirates and his Mithridates command. When he returns to Rome, he is prosecuted as, again, being like one of these other guys, stepping out of line, stepping beyond the boundaries. And the prosecution is brought against him results in him going off and going into exile, which is the typical punishment for a lot of the senatorial class if they're found guilty of this sort of thing. The same thing had happened to Milo, who was leader of the gangs. He had been prosecuted for the death of Clodius, and subsequently again ends up in exile, in his case up in Gaul. In terms of Cicero, as the third example, Cicero had been charged with, of course, that idea of putting citizens to death without a proper trial. That was prosecuted by Clodius, and of course Cicero again ends up in exile. So for Caesar, if he is prosecuted, the most probable outcome would be going into exile. Whether he actually would lose out financially is up for debate, but at the same time, in terms of going into exile, that does mean he's out of the system. So, and for him, for somebody who values dignitas so much, that would probably be more the killer for him.
And they've had the examples of Malleus and Caepio being abrogated completely. So, they're exiled to Smyrna, they lose their citizenship, that kind of huge fallout and embarrassment and all of that sort of thing is on the cards. So I think there is a real threat that if he is a private citizen, even if it's for a day, there will be cases against him lodged. And so he wants to avoid that. His enemies who are in Italy, and he's been absent from Italy for so long that he's lost supporters, that they're all sort of like lining up against him, waiting for him to be a private citizen so they can prosecute him. And so it is this it is essentially a mutually assured destruction, in the sense that you've got an escalation, that you will resign, I won't resign, how about this? Because Caesar does, again, according to Caesar, present several different options that, both he and Pompey should lay down their power. And, I'll accept that. And it's like, well, you don't really mean that, because you never will lay down your power. So it really is there's a famous term. It's what we use for the Cuban Missile Crisis, where it's what's that called? What's that? Oh, come on! It's kind of a brinksmanship and a pushing to the very edge, and then this crossing of the Rubicon is the final step. And I think another one of our questions, we'll talk about it. But I think there is a real threat that if Caesar is not allowed to continue in office, he will be prosecuted. And
I don't think there is actually a threat until the very end. I think that you've got very big personalities here, and I think both of them were putting a lot of things forward, thinking the other will blink first, and it won't come to it. And
I don't mean threat as in someone threatening. I mean there is the possibility it will happen, and I think Caesar is probably aware of that. And so the idea that this shouldn't be allowed to happen, you shouldn't spend a day as a private citizen, is the issue.
He's also given hope as well by the tribunes, because a whole board of tribunes in 52 BC had actually given him the go-ahead to say, actually, we think you should be allowed to hang out in your province until you want to put yourself forward as a candidate for the election in 49, and then assume the consulship in 48, given that you win. Therefore, you've done nothing wrong, because there is this law, of course, that comes from the Sullan reforms, saying that a consul cannot be another consul until 10 years has passed. And Caesar seems to actually indicate that he's going to abide by this law. He's not trying to do anything illegal in that respect. So he's saying, I'm happy to sit up here and wait. And this board of tribunes actually says, well, actually, we agree with you. By all means, we're happy for you to run for consular elections in absentia and then step over the pomerium on the day that you take office. So that obviously just complicates things for everybody else.
In the end, I guess we'll never know. It's just well, yeah, it's as you said, Murray. If you keep pushing on both sides, then at some point somebody says blink. And then what do we know about what really happened? I mean, there's another question here from Russell. Did Caesar ride ahead of his mighty army and cross first, or was it more tactical with outriders clearing the way?
I think the reality of the insignificance of the stream and yes, it marks the edge of the Pomerium into Italy. It's significant, but I don't think it's strategically or tactically, problematic. Was that? Oh, that was it kind of thing. I think it was, no big sign going, Italy starts here. And it's been turned into a literary event by Caesar, but I think probably it's just a ride. That's all it is. It's not a send out the outriders while I cross this insignificant stream. It's not like there's going to be forces opposing him. I mean, one of the signal sort of tactics of Caesar is to march quickly and be where people don't expect him to be, and in the forced marches, which he will show in his march down Italy, and has already shown in Gaul, is the rapidity with which he gets his troops where they're not expected. And so there is that. So I think, he's not opposed in any way.
But he's not doing a forced march at this point. He's been in Cisalpine Gaul for months at that point, and there are rumours running around Rome at the time saying, oh, he's ready to invade. But actually, he's left all of his army up to the north. He's actually only got one legion with him, the 13th, and he's literally been sitting there. Everybody knows where he is. There has been action going back and forth in terms of representatives of him and representatives of various members of the Senate. Unfortunately, they seem not to necessarily have the desired communication with each other. So subsequently, he communicates with his allies in Rome, but doesn't actually make a direct contact with people like Pompey, etc. So everybody knows where everybody is as such. It's not something that's unknown.
I think the leaving most of his army further north is an indication by Caesar, I'm not planning on doing this. If he was massing troops at the border, that would be very obvious. This is what my intention is. So I think, again, it's an unexpected move. It's that brinkmanship final step, and again, I think the really interesting thing about that is the inevitability of what comes after. And I don't think that it's inevitable. And I think the outcome of the Civil War is absolutely in the balance. And again, that comes back to what we were talking about off camera about the famous quote of Elea iacta est, or iacta Elea est, depending on which way round it is. Elea is not a dice. Elea is a game. And so it's a dice game. So it's not a decided thing. And I think in modern terms, we say the die is cast as opposed to let the die be cast. And when we use that translation as the die is cast, we use that in the sense of the decision is made, as opposed to the original, which is we're throwing some dice. Who knows what's going to happen? Because, it's gambling and it might go any way from here.
You could interpret it as you're casting the dice. I mean, it's up in the air now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nobody knows how it's gonna land.
Yeah. And the game of Elea, as I was saying off camera, the chances of throwing a winning throw are like 1%. So the idea that the entire history of the Roman Empire is on this dice throw is like, well, your chances of winning are very slim. And so I think that's far more it's in the hands of the gods rather than the decision is made. We already know what's going to come next.
Well, that second idea comes from it being in the perfect tense, iacta est. So you're basically saying, if you're translating it as the verb, then you're saying, well, it's done. So therefore,
and I think the funny thing is, again, it's in Plutarch and Suetonius, but it's a quote from a Menander play, which, if you go back to the Menander play, is far more open to let the die be cast, not perfect. So, we're both throwing dice to see who throws a winning throw, essentially, is what it's saying. Not that Pompey knows he's gambling at this point, but it's such a I'm gambling with you. What? And I think that's one of the other things, is that Pompey's decisions next are very surprising, which is that he doesn't make a stand. He doesn't Is this idea if I stamp my foot, I can raise legions, and that doesn't really eventuate. And when he does, they're pretty poor. But there's that sense of he now abandons and retreats very quickly.
But I think Pompey, like that quote that you're talking about, the stamp my foot and they will come, that comes very late in the piece in terms of these couple of years leading up to the war. I think we mentioned that Caesar he's doing things that he's saying, well, I'm going to leave it 10 years, so therefore I'm legally abiding by these rules as such. Pompey is doing a very similar thing in saying in the Senate, when people are saying we'd like to talk about the proconsular command in Gaul, and you've got, I think it's Ahenobarbus is basically saying, I want it, and Marcellus is saying, I think we've got good grounds to recall him, and let's bring his soldiers back. Pompey at the same time is actually saying, hold on, should we not wait until till March of 50 BC, which gives the implication that he's waiting till the turnover of commands officially should happen. So he's being very, we're sticking by the rules. We're not going to do anything silly here. And it's only when you sort of get to these panic stations in the very dying months of 51 going into 50, and then, going down into 49, that all of a sudden, bit by bit, you've got panic setting in, some very weird decisions being made, swords being presented to Pompey and told to, you are the sword of that will defend Rome, all these sort of things. Pompey seems to switch his mind right at the last minute, and he's not prepared for what comes next necessarily. No, I don't think any of them were.
So we just answered Peter's question. That was easy.
I think so. I think on the morning Caesar crossed the Rubicon, who had already lost the Republic, Caesar, Pompey, or the Senate? Well, I think it was definitely the Senate. The Senate wasn't getting it back. It was going to be Pompey or Caesar. As it turned out, I mean, the funny thing about the jumping ahead to the end of the Civil War, it ends in such a bizarre way that Pompey has lost the Battle of Philippi, but then goes to Egypt, where he could have fought again, but gets beheaded by agents of the Ptolemies, who think they're doing Caesar a favor, who, when he discovers that this is what's happened, is flabbergasted by the audacity to do such a thing. And so it could have continued. And I think the problem we've got as historians is that Pompey going to Egypt and raising a new army, we look at the next example of that, which of course is Mark Antony and Cleopatra, where they raise a new army to face Octavian in 30 BC, and it goes incredibly poorly and the army's terrible. And so it's like, oh, well, Pompey's would have had a terrible, no, that's not by any means guaranteed. And so I think the fact that you get this moving sort of battlefield around what was the Roman Empire, and then suddenly it's all cut short and Caesar is victorious, still fighting to be done. But the really peculiar thing about that is that it's so anticlimactic, and it's not the ending that anyone was predicting, which I think is part of the thing.
I think with the crossing of the Rubicon, the Civil War could have gone either way at the outset. That is, Pompey had access to vast resources, and this also dovetails in with the next question that we get. But one of the advantages that Pompey had was he had vast resources, especially in the eastern half of the empire, where there are various allied kings who were loyal to him, client kings. But most of the troops that he levied in Italy were inexperienced. Now contrast that with Caesar, who had a very large army of very experienced legionaries who had been fighting in Gaul for a decade. And we see that when they started erecting their siege works at Corfinium, as soon as they started putting up the siege works, which they were very good at doing, having fought sieges, conducted sieges in Gaul, very famously at Alesia, for example, Pompey's men surrendered very quickly. So Caesar had the advantage of moving quickly with a large, experienced army. He grabbed Italy and then followed Pompey across the Adriatic. I still think that had things gone in different ways, maybe Pompey would have won, because Caesar was not always capable of planning his campaigns with the kind of maybe forethought that is. He started campaigns quickly. He had this tendency to maybe get ahead of himself, but he was a great general. Pompey, once again, had battles gone differently, might have won as well. So Caesar had the advantage of the legionaries. He was a great general. Pompey had advantages in the sense of all of the resources he had behind him. And had he been able to survive in Egypt, maybe he would have raised a new army, and Caesar would not have had the I want to say easy time of it, but perhaps he would not have been able to have rolled up the rest of the Pompeians afterward as he did.
I think if Pompey had fought Caesar with a single legion in Italy, the civil war would have, probably Caesar would have had to have retreated back to the rest of his army or called the rest of his army to him. The troops that Pompey had in Italy could have faced a single legion, the 13th.
Well, he's got two legions with him that they are, one of them is a legion that has actually come from Caesar, that was loyal to Caesar from the get-go, and one is a legion that was loaned by Pompey to Caesar, had worked with Caesar in Gaul. So two of them, they've been brought back. The excuse was that they were going to be used for a Parthian campaign, or at least to go and hold back the Parthians for the moment. They never left Italy, and they're there for Pompey to use. The question of that then leads to is if Pompey actually did go on the advance into the north and actually face Caesar, would they actually stay loyal to Pompey or not? And of course, that was in the end probably what made a big decision easier for him.
Do you think this also highlights the difference between raising fresh troops who have no battle experience whatsoever as compared to Caesar's veterans? That is, did Pompey immediately recognize that Caesar's troops were just qualitatively superior? Is that where
they're different? I mean, Caesar's starting to use at this stage different methods, isn't he? Because he's actually started to recognize some of the Cisalpine, Transalpine, Gallic communities as citizens, even though the Senate has not given him permission to actually do so. But subsequently, he uses them to start raising extra legions when he's in Gaul. And of course, I think that might also give some sort of indication to the troops that he is open to new ways of doing things in terms of the type of troops that he is going to bring into the legions. He's changing the traditional flavor of the legions as such. That might have something, an impact on things as well in terms of what Pompey can raise.
Flavor of the legions sounds like a cookbook. I think Dyrrachium shows that Pompey's troops, inexperienced and fresh, they are, when well led, just as capable as Caesar's legions of doing the things that Caesar's legions are supposedly so good at doing. There's the race to the sea in the vellum and the contravellum at Dyrrachium, and they're performing just as well, and they defeat various sections of Caesar's troops in that very complicated, swapping of camps and things like that.
But it seems that that's the point where it could have gone all wrong for Caesar.
Yeah, and we just had an article in the issue about that Caesar's withdrawal from Dyrrachium is not a withdrawal; it's an advance to the rear, which is very much a let's read everything Caesar's doing as having forethought. It's like, no, I think he was forced to withdraw, which is a setback. And again, you have the problem that our main source for it is Caesar, and so that idea that he was the winner, he wrote the history. But I think that in that case, you've got these inexperienced legionaries who are supposed to not be quality troops outperforming veterans, and Caesar is forced to rethink. And then I think the problem then is that the next battle, when they meet, shows the superiority of Caesar's troops, experience, and thinking. That the outnumber in cavalry on the flank was meant to be a deciding factor, but their inexperience. There's a famous anecdote, I think it's Polyaenus, where it's, aim for their faces, because they're new, inexperienced troops, and their vanity will mean they don't protect their bodies. Whereas, who cares about a few facial scars? It makes you, more manly, but not when you're young and inexperienced.
One eye is plenty. Yeah.
Different generation coming through.
So is it really just? I mean, we're talking about Carlos's question here. Is it with all the resources that Pompey had, is it really the quality of his soldiers that does the trick, assuming that they're, well, can we assume that they're equally good generals, or is Pompey maybe past his prime?
Well, again, I think hindsight tells us Pompey's past his prime because he loses. But the reality is Dyrrhachium, again, shows that he is just as capable as Caesar. And again, subsequent events show him to be incredibly unfortunate, not necessarily bad tactically. And I think, again, did I say Philippi or Pharsalus? Oh, God, I can't remember. When they meet in battle, Pompey's battle plan is perfectly sound. He's protected one flank with the coast. He's got an outnumbering force of troops on the other flank. It's like, this should work, and it doesn't. And that's the very vagaries of battle.
War, as they say.
To be fair to him, he has been out of the game for a long time at this stage. I mean, he's had his Eastern campaigns, but his Eastern campaigns didn't really have that much in terms of any set-piece battle as such. It's small actions. I mean, you've got to go back to his time in Spain versus Sertorius to actually find him in a proper battle against a set-piece battle against a real quality enemy. And then, for him to then be thrown in against Caesar, you can't blame him being a little bit rusty to start with. Maybe, as you say, give him a couple of runs and he might get back into the swing of things.
Do we know much about his sort of intermediate leadership, his officers, who are usually or should be the ones that, if you have a good general with a good plan, then you need good officers to provide the stiffening and the execution, and who can do a lot to keep new raw recruits in the field.
You've got the most talked about changing of sides by Labienus coming over from Caesar's campaigns in Gaul. So he grabs a bit of limelight in terms of Pompey's leadership, but at the same time, Pompey is also being hounded by various members of the Senate, people like Cato, who are trying to dictate military tactics to him with their distinct lack of military knowledge.
Armchair generals are a thing of all ages.
I think the other thing is the clementia that Caesar shows to Pompey's officer class is the thing that's highlighted, as opposed to whether they were actually any good or not. And yet, in the subsequent decades, what we get is the Caesarian adherents being promoted rather than the Pompeian adherents. And of course, you've got the Pompeians still sort of hanging on for a few years yet. So all of that is sort of but that implies that they were quality opposition as well, that Pompey's sons and his commanders were quality officer class, which again that's what the Roman military system is all about, that your tribunes and your centurions are high quality, and that even your legati are good quality officers.
So in the end, the factor is the dice just turn against him?
I think so. Caesar was right when he said it. So, yes.
It's a topic that clearly we can talk about for a long time. And we have two questions about that as well. How has it been remembered? Mythologized and misunderstood by Angus. Is it this Angus? Another Angus? Is this Angus? Our Angus, engineer Angus.
Our Angus, there you go.
Ever since, is there a reason for this narrative? And I guess that sort of combines with our patron, who calls himself chairman, talks about Sabaton, the Swedish hard rock band, made a great song about crossing the Rubicon on their latest album, Legends. Have we listened to it? And if so, probably what we think of it. I can only say I've listened to their song Emperor because it has wargaming in it, and we talked about it with the WSS wargaming team. I guess I'll have to listen to the rest and see what they say about ancient warfare.
I think it has been mythologized, and I think, again, hindsight's been perfect for it, because it's the moment. It's the crossing of the boundary. It's when everything, the brinksmanship is over. It's now open war. And because Caesar is victorious, it's turned into the moment that decided it all. And as we've just discussed, the decision is up in the air for a lot longer than simply when he decided to cross the Rubicon. But because he wins, and really not even thinking about the manner in which he's victorious, which I said, is this bizarre anticlimax, because he wins, and because of the subsequent history of the Roman Empire, it is mythologized into the moment. But I think that at any point, as Mark was saying, at any point prior to the 10th of January 49 BC, a decision could have been made which was acceptable to both sides that could have led to Caesar stepping over the Rubicon in office and therefore not being prosecuted. It could have resulted in a lack of prosecution and both Pompey and Caesar laying down their commands. As unlikely as that may sound in hindsight, that could have been a solution. So at any point up to it, it could have had a different path. At any point after it, it could have had a different path. But because of the path it took, it's become a myth and a symbolic moment when, that was the moment when things happened. And I think that's very much driven by Caesar's version of it and, saying something pithy. I mean, did he say something pithy with every river he crossed? Is there like when you cross this, you need to say this?
Is this a Rubicon? Is this a Rubicon? Oh, wait, is this a Rubicon?
If he was a modern, I'll just say it over every single stream I come across. I'll say this word, yeah.
It's probably also to do with the amount of source material that we've actually got on this particular moment or event. We've only got a couple little references in his commentaries. Caesar doesn't actually even really reference it. It's coming from later sources, and the lack of information on it probably helps to mythologize it.
And it is the end of the Roman Republic with a finality that the previous civil wars, Republican civil wars, did not bring. That is because after Caesar wins, even though he did not take any title that we could say was, he's an emperor, the system put into place by his successor, Augustus, Octavian Augustus, would endure for centuries. And the Senate would never have the kind of sway, the kind of power, the kind of influence that it did during the Republic. The values of the Roman state changed. And so crossing the Rubicon wasn't merely, this is the point of no return for this upcoming war that they're going to fight. It really did mark a diversion of Roman history into its, we call it the imperial mode. They had an empire long before they had an emperor, but this actually is the moment that it changes into, let's call it a military monarchy, for want of a better phrase right now.
Yeah, I think it's mythologized in the way that Waterloo is mythologized. People talk about meeting your Waterloo, but Waterloo is another very unlikely dice throw. It's the 100 years. Why is it not? He met his Leipzig. No one ever talks about the previous time that Napoleon was actually defeated and sent into exile. It's all the Waterloo. He met his Waterloo.
There's another year of campaigning. I mean, I think we're just naturally, we're looking for, as we started out saying, this moment has been coming for decades. And we like to have these moments that we can pin them on. Same with Waterloo, the pin June 18, 1815. Finally, all this crap with Napoleon is over. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of weeks, but that's really it. And you can't say that about Leipzig. And of course, then, Rubicon, it's been sort of slowly building. And, we haven't got gunpowder yet, but that's definitely when the match goes in. And then the war against Pompey and an anticlimax, as you said. And then oddly enough, the war doesn't end. In fact, there's still quite some battles to fight, among them quite big ones that Caesar gets himself in trouble again. Then it's finally peaceful. And then we have another one, and we can do another podcast in March on that other famous date.
It gives you an idea, actually, in terms of just how, sporadic this event is really for the Romans, because even when Caesar's control after the Civil War, he's still trying to put a spin on it, that he's still using the same system, still using the same titles. It's not really until Augustus that the Principate really changes the look of the system a little bit more.
But it still uses the same titles.
Yeah, it still uses the same titles, but it's. I think if you want to dig back, it certainly is. This is the bit where it something momentous has shifted, and it might be. It would be interesting to ask how much did people at the time, the common man in Rome in the years afterwards, how much did they realize that what the Rubicon would come to mean? I don't think they would have. This is something that, looking back only, can we really appreciate how much this moment changes what is to come later on.
I think it's fascinating how we do it, not just with Waterloo and Rubicon. Just thinking, Agincourt is like, wow, it's like it's insignificant in the bigger range of things. It does nothing, And 1066 is another one. It's like, 1066 and all that. Oh, it's amazing. And then you look at the history of 1066, and again, it's a very close run thing. Poor old Harold hadn't been having to fight multiple armies in multiple places. It could have ended very, very differently. But there's this sort of it's already happened mentality to the Rubicon and these other events, which are like, actually, no. But that's a far more complicated conversation and, much more nuanced, as we've sort of experienced in the last hour, that it's like, well, actually, that could have gone differently. That could have gone. There's no reason to think that's it's decided because he's done this one thing. And it is hindsight, and it is a later mythologizing about the moment. And you could have chosen another moment. You could have chosen an earlier moment or even a later moment to say that's the moment. But for whatever reason, history has chosen to say that crossing of that boundary.
You could argue maybe the founding of the first triumvirate, but that was probably, over dinner some night that we don't know. And nobody had a pithy thing to say about what lovely dishes were served.
Oh, is it the pithy thing? Is it the pithy thing that makes it the moment? And I think there's something, there's whole collections of sayings, and Plutarch's probably the most famous today, but there were a whole history of apothegmata. People had handbooks to say pithy things at the appropriate moment. Oh, wait. I'll say this one. And again, you get that with We Band of Brothers, all of these things that have attached themselves to moments, as opposed to a mumbling, I don't know, see what happens. It's like, no, let's, you didn't say that, Klaatu Verata. So
the guard doesn't surrender. What is it? The guard dies and doesn't surrender. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's just the fact that he said something. He quoted Menander. That's the reason that it got picked by Plutarch and Suetonius.
It wasn't even original. It's 200 years old by then.
It's a quote. It's like him quoting Shakespeare crossing a river. Absolutely. Yeah.
On that bombshell, see you in a month.